Okay, I want you to imagine being born today, opening your eyes to the world and knowing with absolute certainty that your life is going to stretch across 2 entire centuries. Just take a second to picture the sheer scale of that timeline. You wouldn't just watch your kids grow up, you'd be around to watch entire generations rise and pass on. You'd see cities completely rewrite their skylines as architecture evolves over decades. The technology we completely rely on today, it would become as obsolete as the telegraph, replaced by innovations we literally can't even comprehend right now. It's an incredible thought experiment, really pushing the absolute limits of human endurance. But to truly understand what this means, we have to look way beyond the fantasy.
Because living twice as long wouldn't just mean you get twice as many birthday parties. A 200-year lifespan would fundamentally shatter pretty much every single system we currently rely on. It forces us to completely rethink the vulnerability of childhood, the relentless, everyday grind of our careers, the depth of our relationships, and ultimately, the very meaning of time itself. When the human clock runs for twice as long, every established societal norm is basically thrown into chaos. So what actually happens to humanity when we stretch out the tape measure of life like this? Let's dive into it.
Section 1. The biology of aging, and the first major problem we run into.
Right, so before we can even imagine living to 200, we have to ask a really foundational biological question. Why don't humans naturally live that long in the first place? Well, human aging isn't triggered by some single biological switch being flipped. It's actually a relentless, gradual decline. First, our individual cells accumulate microscopic damage over decades of just existing. Second, our body's natural repair systems, they become less and less effective at fixing all that internal damage. And finally, normal cell division simply halts completely. It's this cascading failure of biological efficiency that limits our lifespan, and it's exactly what scientists are actively trying to reverse in laboratories right now.
Now imagine that science somehow untangled this complex biological knot. Imagine a near-future reality where cellular damage could just be repaired indefinitely, where our telomeres don't shrink into nothingness, and humans could remain youthful and healthy for centuries. If that fundamental biological barrier is actually broken, the ripple effects would touch literally every single corner of our existence. How does the human experience fundamentally change when you erase the biological expiration date? Let's start at the very beginning of the timeline.
Section 2. Rethinking Life's Chapters and Expanding Youth. When we zoom out from that microscopic cellular level to the timeline of an individual person's life, the very first thing that changes is childhood. Today, youth and education occupy a relatively small but highly pressured portion of our lifetime. We demand that young people lock into a definitive career path by the time they're 18 or 20 years old. But with nearly 2 centuries ahead of you, that suffocating rush totally evaporates. Education could become vastly longer and infinitely more fluid, comfortably stretching well into your 40s or beyond. This would allow for a much deeper, wider exploration of the world before you ever even think about stepping foot into the workforce.
And that brings us directly to the working world. I just want to let this massive number sink in for a second. 150. Imagine starting your first serious career at age 25, knowing with absolute certainty that you have another 150 years of labor lying ahead of you. The sheer exhausting magnitude of that number utterly shatters our modern concept of what a career even is. The traditional narrative of climbing a single corporate ladder for 40 years suddenly looks like a tiny little blip on the radar.
A person's working life would no longer be one continuous track. It would become a series of distinct eras. You could easily spend 3 decades as a brilliant scientist, completely start over as a musician in your 60s, and then later reinvent yourself as an aerospace engineer. And while this makes human experience incredibly deep and profoundly valuable, it creates a massive structural roadblock. If people stay at the very top of their fields for a full century, younger generations would find it nearly impossible to break in. This extended timeline would force society to completely redesign its entire economic engine.
Section 3. A Changing World and Experiencing Deep Time.
To really comprehend deep time, we have to look backward first. Think about someone born in 1826. They would have witnessed the birth of steam-powered industry, the flight of the very first airplane, all the way up to modern global computing and artificial intelligence. That is an almost incomprehensible leap for one human mind to process. Now, imagine living through another 200-year technological transformation starting today. You'd be forced to navigate new technologies, biological enhancements, and massive societal shifts that we fundamentally lack the vocabulary to even predict right now. For a 200-year-old observer, the world wouldn't feel like one continuous human era at all. It would actually feel like living through a series of completely alien civilizations. Imagine the sheer psychological exhaustion of learning a brand new paradigm of communication, watching it become completely obsolete, and then being forced to repeat that entire cycle over and over and over again across 2 centuries. Adapting to the future wouldn't be a one-time event. It would be a constant, demanding requirement just to stay relevant in a world moving at light speed.
Section 4. Relationships and memory, and the psychological weight of it all.
Turning inward, the human heart would have to adapt to some truly extraordinary conditions. Families would span immense generations. You could easily be holding your great-great-great-grandchildren. Friendships could be deeply nurtured over 80 years. But expectations for marriage would profoundly shift. Instead of "until death do us part," partnerships might be viewed as beautiful, episodic chapters rather than permanent states. The very definition of what it means to love, to grieve, and to completely start your life over would be rewritten from the ground up.
But dreaming of immortality often overlooks a glaring biological limitation: your brain's physical capacity to actually store all that information. Imagine trying to recall the nuanced, emotional details of a random Tuesday from 130 years ago. Think of your first childhood friends, the dozens of different homes you've lived in, the countless global crises you've watched unfold on the news. The human brain was simply not evolved to permanently archive 2 full centuries of continuous, high-definition data.
Because human memory naturally decays and shifts over time, extending our physical lifespan doesn't guarantee we keep our memories perfectly intact. As our source material highlights, a 200-year life could involve learning how to manage memories as much as learning how to create them. To stay sane and hold on to our very identities, we'd have to become active, ruthless archivists of our own minds, constantly curating what to keep and what to just let fade into the fog of the past.
Section 5. Societal growing pains at the macro level.
So if we somehow manage to solve the biology and navigate the psychology, we're still left with the crushing weight of systemic stress. A doubled lifespan could trigger a catastrophic global population crisis, unless birth rates drastically plummet to match. We'd face compounding, completely unsustainable demands on housing, freshwater, and global agriculture. Governments would be forced to abandon safety nets and economic policies that were entirely built for short lifetimes. A longer life wouldn't just automatically create a utopia, it would push our global infrastructure to its absolute breaking point. And that leads us to perhaps the most critical societal question of all. Who exactly gets access to this medical miracle? If advanced life extension treatments are only available to the ultra-wealthy, the economic gap transforms into a deeply ingrained biological gap. We have to look impartially at how this could divide populations. The gap between classes could become an actual evolutionary divergence, fundamentally separating humanity based on who has the resources to access this extended time and who doesn't.
Section 6. Lifespan versus health span, and what the real goal is.
We've spent this entire explainer assuming a longer life is automatically a better life. But is simply surviving to 200 the actual objective? Because length definitely isn't everything. Imagine reaching age 200, but spending the last century frail, sick, and bedridden. This is exactly why science rigidly distinguishes between lifespan, which is just the raw total of years spent alive, and health span, the period of life spent in vibrant, functional health. The true grounded goal of modern researchers isn't endlessly extending our decline, it's extending our vitality.
Ultimately, a 200-year life would grant humanity the one precious resource we are always constantly running out of: time. It offers unprecedented opportunities to learn every language you've ever wanted to explore every passion, and to witness the slow, incredible march of human progress. But as we've seen throughout this explainer, from our microscopic cells all the way up to our global societies, living this long demands a total, radical redesign of what it means to be human.
But extending time biologically isn't the only way to bend it. Here's a final thought to leave you with today. If science could allow us to survive for 200 years on Earth, what if we could also travel close to the speed of light? Because for a traveler moving at cosmic speeds, the flow of time itself fundamentally breaks down. That is a deeply fascinating physics puzzle, and it's exactly the source material we're going to be exploring next.